Thank you for joining us today for our June webinar on climate trends with Becky Bolinger. The Colorado Water Congress is proud to offer webinars and workshops as benefits to our members and Colorado's water community. You can learn more about the Colorado Water Congress and our upcoming events at cowatercongress.org. I have just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. First off, I'd like to thank our presenters and our members. These presentations are made possible by your support. Today, our presenter is Becky Bolinger, a climatologist and drought specialist at the Colorado Climate Center at CSU. Becky received her bachelor's degree in meteorology from Metro State University in Denver, her master's in meteorology from Florida State University, and her PhD in atmospheric science from Colorado State University. She now works at the Colorado Climate Center within CSU's Department of Atmospheric Science as a climatologist and drought specialist. Her research interests are focused on Colorado's climate variability, climate extremes, and the water cycle. She spends her spare time with her husband and daughter hiking, cycling, running, and enjoying Colorado's beautiful outdoors. Today's webinar will last for about half an hour with some time for questions at the end. As attendees, you are muted throughout the webinar. If you have questions or comments, please type them into the questions pane on your GoToWebinar toolbar. If you have any technical questions, please email me at ebrummett@cowatercongress.org. We are recording today's webinar and it will be available later this afternoon on our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I will pass it off to Becky. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. Can you hear me clearly? Hopefully?
Yeah, I think everyone can hear you.
All right, I just want to make sure. Okay, thank you for listening in. I'm going to give you a drought and climate update for Colorado. And this is going to be an entirely web-based presentation so that you know you can access any of these tools from your very own computer, and you can even follow along right now if you wanted to on the actual website. So one of the web pages that I want to point you to is our climate.colostate.edu/droughtinfo.html page, and I have that here. And this is on our newly updated website that we just launched last week. But if you go to the Drought tab and click it, you'll get this Drought Info page where you can register for one of our webinars, and there's the date, or you can search through our past summaries, join our mailing list, where you can see the current conditions around Colorado. And one of the tools we have here is our NIDIS Intermountain West Drought Conditions tab. And what that takes you to is our drought page here. And it's called the NIDIS Intermountain West page because we're primarily funded by NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System. And it's Intermountain West, so it includes the states of Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, in addition to Colorado. But I will be focusing on Colorado primarily for this presentation, but you'll see the other states in some of the maps that we look at. If you visit this website, you'll notice these little info boxes, and if you mouse over them, it'll give you some information on what the maps you're going to see are and why we consider them important for drought and climate monitoring. So I'm not going to go over those, but if you are browsing the website on your own, you are able to do that. So I'm going to start by showing a map of what our precipitation has looked like since the beginning of October. We call this the water year begins in October and ends in September. So when we're looking at a map like this, we say water year to date. And this is through the end of May. And we're showing the percent of average on this. And if you focus in on Colorado, right there in that green is really in that near average range. So you see a lot of greens, which is good. A lot of Colorado has mostly seen near average precipitation, with a couple of areas that have seen above average precipitation. And then this area in western Colorado around the lower elevations of Garfield and Mesa County have seen slightly below average precipitation since the beginning of the water year. Now this is looking back at May, and you can see where we got some of those excellent numbers for southeast Colorado, largely fell in May and even in late April. Some of these percents of average are 200% of average to 300% of average. This is quite impressive. If you live anywhere along the Front Range, you know we had some late season snow events. In the southeast portion of the state, they had quite an impressive blizzard that occurred there at the end of April, which was really good for drought conditions, but there are still some negative impacts from that amount of snow, and that the growing season had already started, so there was some damage to some crops, and the calving season had also already started, and so there was a lot of casualties with cattle. But in terms of drought, we're very happy to see this, and means we don't have drought right now in that portion of the state. This is really an interesting map in that you can see how the Continental Divide, which is outlined in a little bit darker black line here, really divides what happened across the state. The Front Range and into the Eastern Plains, ample moisture in May, and then a little bit drier as you go west of the divide. This is a map showing what occurred in the last week, and this runs through 7 a.m. as of Monday, although I don't know if anything other than some spotty showers have really fallen since then. But you can see quite impressive totals along the eastern side of the state, and again, drier conditions along the western side of the state. And this is actually something that is very typical for June. When we're looking at a typical June pattern, we see that June is generally drier, particularly for the southwestern portion of the state, and then wetter on the east side and particularly northeast. In fact, in southwest Colorado, June is on average the driest month, and northeast Colorado, June is on average the wettest month. So this is a pretty typical pattern, nothing too out of the ordinary there. And when we want to analyze drought, we can't just look at precipitation in inches. We really need to put it in a historical context to tell us how wet is it, how dry is it compared to that same time period through all of history. And that's how we define drought. If it doesn't happen very often, if it's not this dry very often, that's when we know we're in a drought situation. So one of the things we focus on is the Standardized Precipitation Index, which really takes your precipitation and puts it on a scale from -3 to +3, where 0 is your near average. And the more negative it is, the more rare of an event that is for dry precipitation, and the more likely we are to have drought conditions. So if we look at the short-term SPI, this looks at the last 30 days. You'll see a lot of green colors, purples, and blues, and that means we're seeing wetter conditions, and in some cases, conditions that are so wet that that's actually fairly rare for the area. It doesn't occur that often, such as that La Junta station around Walsenburg, quite a bit wetter. But those greens that you see mean we're in good condition when it comes to precipitation. And if you expand out our state, you start to see some of those drier SPIs that pop up in Utah and Wyoming. But for the last 30 days in Colorado, we've been in good condition. If we extend that out to the 90-day, this is still considered shorter term when we're discussing drought, but not quite so short term as the 30-day. You'll see some of that dryness popping out where we saw on the precipitation maps in western Colorado. Very slight dryness, but when you start to get those oranges, that's when we start watching it a little more for dryness that might be a little bit more abnormal than we'd like to see. You look in the eastern plains and in southeast Colorado, you can see the effects of that late May blizzard and the wet May has led to very positive SPIs there. And along the Front Range, you can see a lot of greens still, so good conditions there. Extending out to the 6 months, we continue to see wetter SPIs. And I will point out that this is something that's quite notable to see this over the entire state. It is not uncommon to have at least one part of the state in a drought situation. And when you look at these maps, it's quite remarkable to see that there are wet conditions pretty much across the board for the state. And there's not really any areas that stand out as being very, very dry. A couple of dryish spots, but nothing really bad. And that's good to see, but the likelihood is that's not going to last long, because it's very common for us to have drought in at least some part of the state at any given time. Extending out into the 9 months, you'll notice around Jefferson County, Park County, we have some long-term dryness, and since that didn't show up in the shorter term, this is definitely from long-term effects going back into the fall. This extends back to September 7th last year, and we start to see the dryness there, and then we still see that dryness in western Colorado. I'm sure that a lot of you know that snow conditions have been pretty good across the state. The key to what has happened snowpack-wise in the higher elevations is that we've had excellent snowpack conditions in the highest elevations, but in those mid to lower elevation mountains, there was definitely some early melt-off that you're not really going to see on these maps. And that's why particularly in western Colorado, areas that should still have had snow into early May had completely melted out and had dry, dusty soils already. But the higher elevations really accumulated a lot of snow through the winter and held onto it well into the spring and are still melting out right now. So I'm going to point out a couple of the basins specific to Colorado. This is the Yampa group. And real quick, I'll show you on this map here, if I blow it up. The Yampa Basin is the one that's in the top northwest corner of the state that says it's currently at 144% of average. Now, this is a little misleading when you look at this map that says our snowpack is 144% of average there, because when you look at the basin-specific time series, you see a little bit of a different story. So what we see, and this is common across a lot of the basins, is there was the green line shows what happened this year. Your blue and purple are your average, or your blue and purple are your average and median lines. And what we see when we look at the green line is that there was not much snowpack to speak of throughout October, which is not normal for that time of year. And entering into November, there was quite a bit of concern that if this continued, it would be a very poor snowpack year and that we would definitely be in a drought. And then mid-November, the pattern started to shift. We started to see a more active weather pattern that was bringing a lot of snow events to those higher elevations. And we see that here, and that there was some good buildup in December and into January. Unfortunately, in the Yampa Basin in northwest Colorado, there was an early peak. So typically, our peak snowpack date is in mid-April, and this year, the peak snowpack there actually occurred in March. Thankfully, there was not a very quick meltout. It's still holding on to that snowpack. So we didn't quite get to the peak, but they're still holding on to some of that snowpack. You can see a little bit of a secondary peak from some late season snowstorms, which is good news always. And then you'll see here that that green line of the current year is actually above that purple line, which is the average, which is why the basin map shows it at 144% of average, because at this date, the line shows just over 8 inches of snowpack, where the average for the same date shows about 5 inches of snowpack. So a little misleading since it didn't reach its peak snowpack, but still not ending the season on too bad of a note. Let me move this. If we shift over to the Colorado main stem, you start to see really good conditions. The Colorado main stem, right up there in Grand County, Summit County, around Lake Granby and Dillon Reservoir. Conditions in those highest elevations were very good. The first peak was early, and we were worried about an early melt, but it was well above the average peak for any given year. And then there was a secondary peak, so really good conditions there, lots of snow to melt out, and is really, the streams right now are really responding to this snow melt and building back up. You've probably seen even along the Front Range, some of the streams are running really good. The lakes and reservoirs are filling, and that's really due to the excellent snowpack conditions we had west of the Continental Divide. Right now, conditions are above average. You're comparing that green line to where that purple line is now. But pretty much you'll notice that the green line is tracking well. We didn't melt out too fast, which helped mitigate any possibility for flooding, and still holding on to some of that snowpack, which is good. Shifting to the Gunnison River Basin, we also see an excellent snowpack with a couple of peaks and accumulations late into the season, and also tracking well with the normal melt season right now. And I don't know if any of you noticed, but the red line shows what happened last year, so you can also see that what we've experienced this year, first it didn't start out very well at all, and last year did, but we've definitely had a lot more snow this year than what we had last year. And around the Four Corners region, the southwest part of the state at San Juan Basin, also saw some excellent peak values well above the average, and not too quick of a melt out, really tracking along with the normal melt. So that is the situation for snow around the state, and I'm going to zoom out a bit. So when we're talking about stream flow in Colorado, it's a very closely related variable to what is happening with snow. Snow accumulates, stream flow is generally lower because it's colder. There's not much precip that can run off into those streams to increase the levels. And then as soon as that snow starts melting, we see the response almost immediately in those stream flows. So looking around the state, this is as of June 6th. These are the USGS stream gauges around the state, 7-day average stream flows. And the greens are the near normal range, so about the 25th to 75th percentile of flows. And then when you get to these oranges, you're looking at some below normal flows. And when you get to the blues, you're looking at above normal flows. So as you can see, looking across the state, we have excellent stream flow conditions. We do have some higher stream flows responding to that melting snowpack. Areas where you see these oranges, it's possible that that's due to management. We have a lot of reservoirs that are managed, particularly in Granby County, and as you get in along the Front Range, some of these are just really management, how much they're allowing to flow through these streams, and working to empty some reservoirs that might have, that they don't want to spill over from the snowmelt and filling other reservoirs that have been low in the entire winter. So overall, stream flow conditions match up well with those snowpack conditions to show that the water in our state right now is in very good condition. So this is our surface water page, and I'll direct you first to reservoir supplies. And we typically don't regularly monitor the reservoirs that are along the Front Range or east of that, but I do know, attending a meeting at the end of May, that it seemed as though water managers were expressing that they were expecting to fill their reservoirs. And because May was not a very hot month and there was a lot of precipitation, demand seemed to be, on the most part, pretty low. So water supplies for the Front Range and into eastern Colorado are in excellent condition. And we also see that when we look at the reservoirs west of the Continental Divide. This is Lake Granby. The colors are the ranges. Your green here is that near normal range, and then the blues are above normal, and the yellow and browns are below normal. The black line is showing what's happened over the past 2 years. So you can see generally what happens every year is that the reservoir levels are dropping in the winter, reach their minimum right before that snow melt starts. And then once the snow melt kicks up, the stream flows kick up, you'll also see the reservoir levels kick up, and that is what we are seeing on Lake Granby right now, that they have kicked up and are looking really good in that above normal category, and I'm sure they're releasing a lot of water to ensure that they don't go over that dash line, which is their maximum capacity. Don't want to go over that, so I'm sure they're releasing a lot, and you can generally see that as in a response in the Front Range reservoirs like Carter and Horsetooth, and some of those northern Colorado reservoirs. I'm not going to go over all of these, but just to show you that different things happen on different reservoirs. This is McPhee Reservoir in southwest Colorado, and it had a good healthy bump as the snowmelt started, and a little bit of a drop, but still rising in that near normal range. So our water supplies across the western half of the state are in very good condition. And even though this is not in our state, people generally have an interest in what's happening in Lake Powell, because so much of our state's water ends up feeding Lake Powell due to our Colorado River Compact. And Lake Powell has been suffering pretty much since the turn of the century, when we had very bad drought conditions in 2002, and it's been struggling to increase ever since. So this is actually a really good sign when you look at Lake Powell, that in the past month it has actually entered that near normal range. And they will also be releasing a lot over to Lake Mead. So I wouldn't necessarily expect it to stay in that near normal range, but it is good that we've been able to fill it a little bit more than we normally fill it at this time of year. Also, in our surface water analysis, we look at soil moisture. So this is the amount of water that the soils are holding. And this is not from observations, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of soil moisture observations around the state or around the country really. So this is a modeled product known as the variable infiltration capacity model. It's really a bucket model that kind of pours different amounts of water into what's on the surface, what goes into soils, and what goes into the deep ground. And it's driven by temperature and precipitation. So you will see a lot of good relationships with where we've had a lot of precipitation. Those soil moisture values will look good. And again, this is put into a percentile, so it's easy for us to understand how often the conditions are like this. So if you look at the second percentile, that's pretty rare dryness. That's every 2 out of 100 years that it's considered that dry in that spot. So when we look around the state of Colorado, mostly we're looking at very good conditions. The white is near normal. We do have a little bit of that dryness between the 20th and 30th percentile when we look around western Colorado, where we've had some short-term precipitation deficits. And then we see some of the greens, which are those wetter soil percentiles, popping up as you go east of the Continental Divide and over into the plains. This is another modeled product. Well, it's kind of modeled and also takes in information from satellite. It is called a VegDry, and it really looks at the moisture or the vegetative health around the region. And it also partially does pull in precipitation data, so you will see a good relationship with precipitation when you look at this product as well. But this really gives you an idea of the vegetative health across the state, which we can see the greens showing healthy vegetation in southeast Colorado. Northeast Colorado, mostly close to average, and having driven across northeast Colorado at the beginning of May, I can say that conditions looked pretty good, even on those dryland crops. There was a lot of green. The biggest pockets of dryness that pop up are, it's been improving over the Front Range, so it doesn't look as bad, but you'll notice Park County really sticks out, and that is due to a lot of the long-term dryness that popped up there last fall. And then you'll start to see that dryness in eastern Utah and western Colorado as well. So next I'll go into temperatures. On this page right now, we only have last month and what's going on this month, but it's been a very interesting story, particularly since the beginning of the calendar year. Most notable is February. It was so warm throughout the entire state, and March was also very warm, and many sites in the lower elevations east of the Continental Divide didn't really receive any snow at all for March, which is on average the snowiest month of the year. So that was a bit of concern, and then April things started to cool off a little bit. May continued this cooler pattern. You can see here when you look at May, these green colors are below average. And in some cases, we're looking at 2 to 4 degrees below the monthly average. And we got those late season snowstorms. This is an interesting pattern we've seen over the last few years, where we've had tremendous warm anomalies in the middle of the winter, and then we have a cool spring with some late season snow events. So that's been a little bit different than what we normally expect to happen. So another interesting tidbit is that the March temperature was actually warmer than what our average April temperature is. So it was really quite notable how warm it was in the late winter, and for it to just completely switch to a different pattern was somewhat of a relief, and has helped keep us out of drought conditions going into that more active weather pattern with cooler temperatures. This is looking at temperatures across the region for the last week, and you can see we've got some warm anomalies. That's in the 3 to 6 degrees above average along the western side of the state, and then slightly warmer but closer to average temperatures along the highest mountain ranges and extending into eastern Colorado. Temperature kind of leads into how much evaporative demand do we expect. Evaporative demand is going to tell you how much water you're going to be losing from your ground So it's very important to know not just how much water are we gaining from precipitation, but how much water could we possibly be losing. And this product, the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, gives us an idea of that. And I don't think one of the people in our office, Peter Goebel, is quite an expert, and he's feeling a little bit skeptical about what the modeled product is showing as of late. It's showing lots of blues, but it's showing it over western Colorado where all the other indicators say it's dry. And it's not showing blue over eastern Colorado where temperatures have been cooler and precipitation has been falling, and we would expect to see blue. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but this is at times can be a helpful product to show you where you expect to lose more water out of the ground, and particularly over the crops there. We have our own network of stations where we estimate evapotranspiration, that is losing water from the crops. And this is part of our COAGMET network that we maintain here at the Colorado Climate Center. I'm not going to show all of these, but just to give you an idea of what this product shows is the black line shows you an average accumulation of evapotranspiration throughout the growing season. So starting April 1st and ending September 30th, at the Olathe site, we expect to see over 40 inches lost from evapotranspiration from an irrigated crop. The red line shows what's happened in the maximum ET years, and that was 1994. If any of you recall, that was an extraordinarily hot year, hot summer to be specific. And the min year is 2015, so there wasn't as much evapotranspiration lost from the crops. The blue line shows what is happening currently, and you'll see that it is tracking slightly above average. So that dryness that we're seeing in western Colorado, and those warmer than average temperatures are really leading to a little bit more evaporation than what normally happens. On the flip side, this is in southeast Colorado at Avondale. You can see that that blue line is tracking well below average, so a lot less evapotranspiration occurring than what we typically see. So real quick, I'm just going to talk about what the Drought Monitor is showing. This is at droughtmonitor.unl.edu. Last November, we had some concern with that snowpack not starting to accumulate. We had a dry fall on the plains, and what that led to was that we had abnormally dry conditions over most of the state, and D1, which is considered moderate drought for a lot of the eastern plains and along the northern Front Range of Colorado. When we get to December, the Front Range conditions, this is starting in the higher elevations of Larimer County, Lincoln County, Kiowa County, we added severe drought conditions. It was very dry. But we started to see a shift, and this is when we really started accumulating a lot of the snowpack in the mountains, and we were able to get rid of those drier than the abnormally dry conditions east or west of the Continental Divide, although we still had a lot of that dryness in eastern Colorado. And in February, we had to keep a lot of that dryness. We weren't getting snow. We had very hot temperatures. Conditions were not looking good throughout the region east of the Continental Divide, and conditions west of the Continental Divide were excellent. And you can see, following a dry March with no snow recorded for a lot of this region, we ended up adding severe drought back along the Colorado Front Range, basically from south of Denver to north of Fort Collins. May, we had excellent late April. We had that sudden pattern shift that happened, I believe, in mid-April. We started to get a much more active pattern. We were able to eat away at a lot of that D0, that D1, the severe drought was removed, and we still only had that one pocket of D1 in Park County, which you've seen as a dry spot, still showing up. And then you'll also notice that that's when we introduced D0 into western Colorado. And here is our current map. So we have the D0 along the Colorado River, western Colorado, and then we have this D0 area still around Park County. And these are very different in that this one in western Colorado is really from short-term dryness that has really developed in the late winter and persisted into the spring, while this D0 is diminishing effects from the long-term impacts of drought from last fall. So these D0s are very different. I would expect, if conditions continue the way they are now, that this D0 could disappear pretty soon, and that this D0 could expand or become more severe if they don't get some more precipitation. But overall, this is a very good map to see because this is not a drought category, it's just abnormally dry. So right now we have no drought in Colorado, which we're always excited about. And I'm going to end there, and I will take any questions if anybody has any.
So if you have any questions, if you could type them into the questions pane on your GoToWebinar toolbar, that way we can read them out. So I am currently not getting any questions. However, if anyone does have questions, you can email them to Becky at
Becky.Bolinger, that's B-O-L-I-N-G-E-R, @colostate.edu.
So we did have one question just come in from Wayne Vandisher, and Wayne asks, what is the outlook?
Oh, I missed the outlook part. So here is our 7-day precipitation outlook across the country. And if you focus in on Colorado, you will see that over the next 7 days, they expect, and when I say they, I mean the Water Prediction Center for NOAA shows between 1/2 inch to 1 inch along the Front Range, which would really be near average, nothing spectacular, but also helping us stay near average, and unfortunately not very much along western Colorado, which is also not atypical for this time of year, but also means it won't alleviate the dry conditions we've seen. The 2-week outlook, so this is looking out 8 to 14 days, and this is put out by the Climate Prediction Center, shows that there is a greater chance for below average precipitation. And usually when you have that, it's combined with warmer temperatures, which we only see for part of the state, but here's a greater than average chance, greater chance for above average temperatures. So that's what is shown in the 2-week. And then if we look out at the summer outlook, the Climate Prediction Center shows the entire state as having a good chance for above average precipitation through the summer. So we can hope that that pans out to keep those drought conditions at bay. And then the drought outlook shows not really an possibility for drought development across the state. Not necessarily meaning that that's exactly going to happen, but there's not a lot showing that that is likely to happen. So any other questions?
So I'm not seeing any more questions, but if you do have questions, you can email them to Becky.
And I think that we can probably go ahead and wrap up now. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your attendance. And Becky, thank you so much for being our host today.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. All right, we are going to go ahead and sign off. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.